Welcome, everyone. Hello from Sweden, up north here. It's great to see everyone here. We're going to have a first panel to discuss what they call the elephant in the room, which is subscriptions, and particularly all-you-can-eat subscriptions. In order to do that, we're going to have Pieter Swinkels here from Kobo. We're going to have Joerg Pfuhl, who is a publisher and former CEO of Holtzbring in Germany. And you're going to have Marcos Pereira from Sextante in Brazil. But just to give some context of that, Rutger prepared some slides on subscription and what happened in the last month with digital books and in this particular business model that he's going to share with us. And then we'll take the discussion from there. So Rutger, back to you.
Thank you. And I just start with sharing a screen where we have a new study that we are in the process of finalizing. It's not been released so far. These are brand new pieces of analysis where we try to understand ebooks and audiobooks in markets as different as Canada, Germany, Italy, Spain, Brazil, and Mexico. And I picked a few slides that are particularly about ebook and audio growth overall and growth in different models. Unsurprisingly, in all markets that we could survey based on data from digital aggregators, we saw the expected growth of digital in all formats in last year. These are the turquoise columns here, and we have usually a very similar pattern along the year, which shows us a particularly high increase in the second quarter when all these lockdowns and the closures of bookshops have started. In the example of the Spanish language market, we see how massive that peak was in the second quarter of 2020. And the case of Spanish language is relevant because Spain and also Latin America have always been very, very slow in adapting and reaching out into digital. Ebooks have had not more than 5%, and audiobooks are just at the beginning. But even there, across the board, and that's the picture on the right, we see a massive increase not only in ebook sales, but also in everything that comes at a continuous access level, like subscription services, library lendings, which are also very controversial, or streaming. And by streaming, we mean when you log into a, for instance, music platform and consume your audiobooks via the music streaming platform. And we see really how clearly that is like a springboard. Suddenly, even in markets like Mexico or Brazil, subscriptions and library lendings of ebooks have become significant. And that is one starting point for the conversation. Also in Germany, where ebooks and later on audiobooks have had already a growing penetration, also Germany is seeing something very, very clear in terms of growth. When you look along the year, it is interesting that really some ebook and audiobook seasons are emerging. The one, I have to add one caveat, the negative growth in August of 2020 is only due to an accounting process. But otherwise, you see, we are starting to have clear seasons which are relevant for ebooks. Now, the second thing is we also have, when we are going into audiobooks, a similar effect as we have seen in ebooks before, certain sweet spots in terms of pricing for downloads. People are prepared not only, they're not always prepared to pay 20 or more euros or an equivalent for the equivalent of what used to be 3, 4, 5 CDs full of audiobook content. They also want and get offers at much lower prices, like 5, 6 euros or 11, 12 euros. And that means in terms of marketing and revenue generation, that people are really experimenting, and publishers are well advised to be very careful and in not only their pricing, but in their understanding that the field of digital has become multi-format, but also multi-distribution models, multi-price segments. So it requires to start building marketing strategies that are pretty complex. And here again, for the case of Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, we see how massively audiobooks in subscription have, by volume, by complete units consumed, overtaken the downloads. People in enormous numbers are starting to consume these new models, and we see that subscriptions have seen a much more continuous increase over the year. Again, the deep decline of Q3, the August decline, is an accounting, but still the average growth in linear trends in ebooks for downloads is clearly lower than the increase in subscription. And these data were provided by Bookwire, DeMark, Libranda, and Editora and Readbox. And starting by next week, you will be able to download this from global-ebook.com. I will post in the chat the download link in a second. And that's already what I wanted to show, and ask Carlo to take over as the moderator for this session.
Thank you, Rüdiger. It's very interesting to have this data. Thank you. And because I live in Sweden, which has become a little bit of the subscription country, and people here have subscription for coffee now. You can pay coffee monthly, or car wash. You can have a subscription at the gas station, and you can car wash your car as many times as you want. It's incredible how this is happening here. But I want to hear from our panelists. So what I'm doing is I'm going to ask our panelists first to introduce themselves a little bit, to talk a little bit about them, and then to answer one first question, which is, are subscriptions, and particularly all UK subscriptions, something we should be worried about? So Joerg, maybe we can start with you. So Joerg Pfuhl, if you can tell us a little bit more about you and tell us what you think about subscription, if that's something you should be worrying about.
Yes, hello. Thank you, Carlo. And hello, everyone. I saw some familiar faces, which is always great. And I'm totally stunned about where you all are coming from. I see that in the chat. I don't think I've ever attended such a global publishing meeting. Very exciting. And I think it only proves how much interest there is in this topic, and that it really has global relevance. My background, I spent almost my entire adult life in trade publishing. I worked at Random House in New York for 4 years, then ran Random House in Germany for 9 years, did a stint at university, and then ran the Holzbring publishing houses for the last 4 years, and am now independent again, working as a lecturer and consultant to various companies. And subscription has always been a topic of interest. That's why I didn't hesitate when Rüdiger asked me if I wanted to speak on this, because I may have a different opinion to lots of publishers, but I know I'm not the only one, because I'm a heavy believer in subscription. Driven by the fact that I fundamentally believe that the consumer always wins in the long run, and subscription is a model that has replaced the old book club, really, and we may be going into that a little more. To me, it's a modern format of the book club. And when this all came up, and we all had to think about how we position ourselves and do we want to participate or not, there was almost a religious fundamental belief that subscription was cannibalizing traditional book sales, and it was evil, and it was all or nothing. This was the last battle, and if we lost that, then the industry was doomed. And I never bought that. The book clubs didn't kill the book industry, quite the opposite. But not everyone participated in licensing to book clubs, right? There were already two camps. And the same happened when ebooks started. I still remember that 20 years ago. There were colleagues who thought ebooks were just a fad and would go away and you didn't need to bother. And we now all know, yes, there were investments necessary and huge efforts required to make ebooks available, but it was worth it. And to me, the same with subscription. It's not an all or nothing proposition, and I'm sure we'll talk a little more about what's required to make subscriptions work. It really is a means of selling books. And if, as a publisher, you decide not to cater to certain sales channels, if you don't want to sell to supermarkets, or if you don't want to sell at airports, that's fine. And if you don't want to participate in subscription models, that is fine as well. But I think it takes a lot of courage not to take part in those sales. To me, that has always been a very relevant sales channels. And as personal experience, and that's my last comment, and I'm sure we'll get into that later as well, the learnings I've had from that, I was not only licensing to subscription models, but I was actually one of the evil guys who actually launched 2 subscription models in Germany. One was the launch of Audible, which I'm sure you are all familiar with. In 2004, we launched Audible in Germany. At that time, just with our own books, because no one else participated. The entire industry was against it. And in 2012, we launched an ebook subscription company called Scooby. Same reaction there. Everyone thought it was evil, and it took a shorter time than with Audible to get more people on board, but still the initial reaction was relatively reserved. So that's my starting point, and I'm sure we'll cover many of those points in the discussion.
Thank you, Joerg. And if I can go from Germany to Brazil now, Marcos, can you tell us a little bit more about you, Sextante, and Nautibooks also? I think perhaps even very relevant here. And if it's subscription is something for us to worry about. And please feel free to disagree. The idea here is to have some debates, for Christ's sake.
I'm fine, Carlo. I'm fine. Well, again, the same way as Joerg, I'm happy to see so many familiar faces. Thank you so much for the invitation, Rudiger and Carlo. My name is Marcos Pereira. I'm a publisher in Rio de Janeiro. I'm also the president of the Publishers Association. I've been president for the past 7 years. And been involved with publishing. I started working in 1981, so I'm celebrating 40 years in publishing this year.
Congrats.
It's great that we have a publisher started saying that he's a big supporter, and I from your take, what I would like to point is, when you think about subscription as a book club, I think it's a great idea, because I believe the ecosystem. We in the pandemic, the ecosystem of the book industry became very evident, because all of a sudden, people are reading more. The publishing industry all around the world flourished. It's something we're a little embarrassed to say, but we're doing well. So Rudiger was showing the data for ebooks. The data for physical books is even stronger. The data for audio is stronger. But there is one thing that we know suffered a lot, and that is new releases, introducing new books to the audience. So the pandemic showed that we are more concentrated. We're concentrated in companies that have big catalogs. We're concentrated with authors that have big audiences. And when I think about the ecosystem, I think about bookstores. and I think about the value of bookstores in the whole ecosystems as the showcase for new releases for new authors. And I'm very concerned about streaming, especially all-you-can-eat models, because I don't believe they're healthy for the ecosystem. I think there is a disruption of value. And we have been watching, books have been losing value over the years. I live in a country where we have inflation. This is a disease for us. We lived from 1984 to 1994, inflation in Brazil was 20% average a month. So we had to learn to live with that. I don't think you in the first world particularly perceive inflation the same way we do. I was looking at the data right now. Inflation in the US from 2003 to 2021 was 38%. The Da Vinci Code was launched in the United States in 2003 at $24.95 price. If you correct my inflation, the price would be $34.50. And a fiction hardcover launched right now will be launched at $29. So this is a loss of value of 16%. In Brazil, our average is about 40% over the same period. So we have been devaluating our content over the years without much growth in readership in terms of numbers. My concern with models that offer an all-you-can-eat for a price which is much lower than the average price of the book, I think we're devaluing even more our content. And by doing that, we're hurting the ecosystem. We're hurting bookstores. We're hurting distribution. And in the end, we're hurting the authors. So I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned. I like that. I have to point it again. I think the book club, the idea that you commit to something and you pay a lower price. This is a great idea. If I can commit someone to read one book per month, I think it's fair that you give him a better price than if you buy one by one. But I really don't like the idea, especially I don't like the compensation model. And I'm sure this sounds like a very dinosaur way of thinking, but I hope Peter will contradict me. So I'll finish here.
All right. Thank you, Marcus. No, that's great. And again, we are really just went a Reboot to be a debate and to listen to different ideas, which I think has been more and more necessary lately. So now I'm gonna go from Brazil to Canada to Pieter Swinkels. And I think it's quite interesting, Peter, that Kobo has a all-you-can-eat subscription model. Kobo, I'm a witness to that. It's probably the most publisher-friendly platform, bookstore, whatever in the world. And so even for me, it was really surprising when Kobo Book Plus started. But first, tell us a little bit more about you first and your take on this controversial issue.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Pieter Swinkels. I am a Dutch Canadian, grew up and lived in Holland most of my life. Used to be a publisher, a very traditional publisher at the Busy Bee, the Bezige Bij. And I would never call Sextante a dinosaur. It's a lightning beacon for many of us. So it's good to see you, Marcus, and good to see you, Joerg. And actually, some people I see, and I haven't seen everybody, but some old friends. Simon, I want to call out, an ex-colleague who went to BC, I haven't seen for a long time. Like I said, most of my career has been in traditional publishing. When I moved to Canada, I joined Kobo, which was a very young startup about 10 years ago, and started to take Kobo, introduce it to other countries, and take it around the world. I'm currently Chief Content Officer, which means I'm overseeing all the publisher relationships, a self-publishing platform, and a small originals program. And Marcus, you said like, oh, sorry, Carlo, you said like you were surprised to see Kobo into going into subscriptions, and I share that surprise because my background, I actually wasn't very positive about the idea of subscriptions, but I also changed my mind completely. So I'm a little bit of an evangelist. Maybe at the end of the meeting, Marcus will actually sign up right away. That's my drive. So Kobo's model, for those who don't know it, we have ebooks, audiobooks, and try to partner with a local bookseller for various reasons. But very importantly, we see around the world that several big global partners take over the book market. We think that's a threat to the local book industry and to local publishing. So we try to partner right in the middle of that local book industry, give that local retailer the keys to a global platform to compete with the big global platforms. One of those in the Netherlands, my native country, bol.com, is a phenomenal partner to us. We have a fantastic, thriving business. They actually came to us and said, we want to do subscriptions. And for a while, we kind of weren't positive. But we also said, if subscriptions is ever going to be successful, we have to start with the author and make it valuable for the author. So that's what we did. We spoke to the key publishers in the Netherlands for several years, many meetings to figure out a model that would work for everybody, because most of those models are good for the retailer or good for the publisher, but are not really good for the long term. So we developed a model that is all you can eat, full revenue share, where a huge portion of the total income goes to the author, not by a pool that we decide how much we put in. All the money that we earn goes into a pool, and then we divide it between every partner. So I think that's key one. It has to work for the author. What we saw was when we launched it several years ago in Netherlands is that all the discussions about cannibalization and the devaluation of the book and the perception of book versus the print book, it kind of disappeared very quickly. And if there's one learning that I had is that whole discussion is actually not very relevant. Why is that? Because we, as in the reading industry, we are kind of faced with competition from outside the industry, whether it is non-reading time, so time you spent on the internet or spent on other things that are not reading, or general the information overload we're in. It is a competition for time. So by moving into a model where the internet gravitates to, everything gravitates to a form of subscription on the internet, we offer customers a much easier, lower threshold to reading time. And that's, I think, the key learning to really absorb. We're trying to make people read. After we've made people read, we can begin to compete between which platform or which publisher or which book and all of it. But the key thing is to make people read again. By an all-you-can-eat service, you remove the threshold. So basically, we if you go into a bookstore, you buy, you spend $20, you come home, you start reading the book, and you discover you don't like it. You've now lost that $20. We all know the big secret in the publishing industry is most books don't get read. Everybody look at your bookshelves. Most of those books have, probably 60% hasn't been read. That threshold we kind of completely take away, because once we have you in a subscription, we only have to do one thing, that is to encourage you to read. There's not a perverse incentive to kind of make you make you go to sleep and never read books, because that's cheaper for us as a retailer. In the revenue share model and all you can eat model, we only have to read you more books. So if this book doesn't work, go to the next book, and we'll try to help you with our technology to find that right book. If you don't like it after 30 pages, go to another book. Just keep reading. Just do it. It's like the Nike slogan. Just do it. Just read. And that's for us as booksellers. That's a fantastic experience, because we can really zoom in to apply our technology and understanding and the local curation to really focus on reading. Now, what we have learned is that there's a lot of discussion about new titles. Should we put new titles in? Should we window or not? What we see is those new titles are important because they are the poster boys and girls, and they attract people. But the real business is in the backlist. So we see, if you go back to the books that were published in 2020, and compare books that were put in the subscription and not in the subscription, there's kind of both markets grow. It's not that a la carte stops growing, it's actually still growing. But there's one thing that we noticed right away. Every single book that goes into the subscription also does better in the a la carte. So that's kind of the cannibalism dogma. It's simply not true. We don't see it. Why is that? We believe, as we study our data, that we're actually marketing to two very different cohorts. In the first year, we could easily see that most people that got into the subscription had never bought a book before at Kobo or at bol.com. We basically, as we like to say, increased the cake. We were fishing into an entirely new group of consumers that had never bought a book before. Carlo, I can easily fill this hour, so do interrupt me if.
No, that's.
I'll make 2 more points, and then we
all right, please go ahead.
So the whole pie became bigger, and then we noticed that the older the title was, so titles that were published in the year was put into subscription, the year of publication, about half the money, half the revenues go to a la carte, half goes to let's skip that point. But a certain percentage, about 40%, went to subscriptions for that title. If you go to titles that were published 2 years before, so 2018, 60% of the revenues went to subscriptions. Books from 2013 or older, about 65% went to subscriptions. What we saw is, yes, those new titles are important and we use them for marketing, but the true business is in the backlist. The backlist, you like a beautiful prince, you kiss away the princess of the backlist, and it really starts to come to life again. And we see now that those wonderful authors that we all love as publishers, for instance, Karen Slaughter used to publish, who every July came with a new book, bang, hundreds of thousands straight into the store. Those authors that really drive the commercial part of the publishing. Those authors, they have a peak when the new book comes, and then slowly sales peter out again till the new book comes. What we notice is those peaks continue, but the slower areas in between, the month and the years when there's no book, were now filled up by the backlist in subscription. All the titles really did overperformed in subscriptions. I'll leave it there for now to get the discussion starting.
Thank you, Peter. I'm just going to go to some questions here. Simon Collins actually is asking about data available on inflation-adjusted book price history. I think there is very few, but actually Rudiger did a research once, and we had to deflate all the numbers with European inflation. And actually he used a Brazilian economist for that, because you're an expert of deflation. So I think there is this study available somewhere. He can answer on the questions. And then Nicola Richter from Microtext, who is going to be speaking later, comment exactly on backlists and new release, what is important. I think her question has been covered here, but she talks about book clubs. And also Michalis from Greece also asks about book clubs. And he asks if to have a serious book club culture, is it a condition to be successful in subscription? So that's a question I sent to the panel. Maybe Joerg, you can comment on that, because we started Audible in Germany. So to have this book club culture, is that very important for subscription? Or now everyone just loves Netflix and everyone can just jump to subscriptions?
Let me just add one quick sentence about the inflation and book prices. To the best of my knowledge, that doesn't exist, has never been done. We did only complete markets, which is a different story. But I pick up the idea and will consider if we can find a way of doing it.
Yeah, that's a worthwhile topic, because I agree with Marcus that probably across the globe we have devalued, or books have been devalued, and there are many explanations for that. Yeah, so let's start, and I have a few comments also to both participants, but let's start with the book club question. I use that analogy because I think it's very similar. We certainly wouldn't want the entire market to go through book clubs, because it would mean we'd be selling our products at a much lower price. Granted, we'd have committed buyers, but the market would shrink. And that's not what we want. So the book club is just an analogy. I think consumers have gotten very much used to subscription models, and the examples that you had from Sweden, Carlo, I thought were very enlightening, because they're outside of the media industry, where we tend to look at our little pool that we're swimming in, and we see what's happening in film and Netflix and in music. But there are many subscriptions that we all now have, right? I've stopped counting my subscriptions. It's endless, and it's the flavor of the day, and consumers have been very accustomed to it. So I think the book club was just an analogy. I think subscriptions are, for many people, a very interesting way to consume products, and particularly media products. But to take away some of your concerns, Marcus, I think for one, books are different from many other products, just for the reasons that were already mentioned. A third or more of books are bought as gifts, and you don't really want to give away a subscription. And physical books, for everyone who loves books, have particular relevance, so they're not going to go away. Subscriptions, and what I always find striking is that when you talk to young kids, they all want physical books, right? If you give them the choice between a tablet and a physical book, they will, to 98%, they will always pick the physical book. So I think we have an opportunity here of having a different sales format, sales channel, whatever you want to call it. And again, it's not an all or nothing proposition. I fully agree with what Peter said, and the stats that you mentioned, Peter, I can completely attest to from a publisher's side. The fun here lies in the backlist. That's where the money is being made, and books that otherwise would not find their place still find buyers. And it's amazing how all of a sudden titles develop a third or a fourth life after even our sales reps don't remember them anymore, that people come across. And also, I also share your experience, Peter, that we attract new consumers, people who did not buy books previously, who did not listen to audiobooks, who didn't even know audiobooks existed. They came through the internet, they were searching for whatever, and they landed, and they wouldn't think even of going to a bookstore to look for these things. So as much as I share your concern, Marcos, about the future of bookstores, because they are crucial for our industry, I don't think we're killing bookstores by allocating a certain percentage of our business to subscription models, because like Peter said, I believe we're making the pie bigger, and we're attracting consumers who otherwise wouldn't even be interested in us, and particularly younger consumers. I mean, we all assume that everyone is a book buyer and a book reader who grows up. That's just not the case, right? I see it with my daughter. They're spending all their time on mobile phones. And so if we give them one way to find us, I think we should absolutely go for that. And the other statistic, which is also interesting, looking at the buyer's perspective, Peter shared that as well. I had the same experience there, that in the surveys we did with both subscribers from Audible and from Scooby, people said they are spending more, not only more time, but also more money on books, because they have their subscription. It doesn't mean they stop buying books. Quite the opposite. Most of them actually said they're spending more time reading and spending more money on books, and that's almost as nice as it gets. I think the key lesson, and maybe that's one message I want to convey here, is I think in the discussion around subscriptions, it always gets lost. It's not an all or nothing proposition. So for example, we never put our current bestsellers into the program, because we do want to promote a backlist, and that works, right? That's kind of the deal, and that was the deal with the book club as well. We didn't put our current bestsellers there. We put older books there. And so they get a second life, or a third or a fourth life. And that's definitely something to encourage. So I think the key word here is not cannibalization, it's differentiation, because we're trying to make the offer to consumers yeah, more compelling and just more diverse.
Thank you, Joerg. I really like your approach on it's not all or nothing. And it's interesting that lately, even the platforms are experimenting a lot. So Audible, for instance, when they open in Italy and Spain, they now have an all-you-can-eat subscription model. On the other hand, Storytel in Finland, very discreetly, started a limited subscription model where they charge a cheaper price, limiting it to, I don't remember now, $20 per month or something like that for audiobooks. So it feels, and BookBeat in Sweden also, they really have now limited subscriptions. They limit it by the time of consumption and make it a little bit cheaper. So it feels like the platforms are all trying to find another model. So do you guys think between the position of Storytel, which they defend all you can eat forever, and the Penguin Random House public opposition to any all-you-can-eat subscription? If you guys don't know, Penguin Random House doesn't sell rights to all-you-can-eat subscription. So if you buy rights from Penguin Random House, you cannot put them in the platforms, even if it's a translation. Do you guys think we're gonna eventually find in the middle somewhere? Is the so-called credit model where you pay and you get one book per month, or get a credit to change, so limited subscriptions? Do you think that's where it's going to go? And if it is, don't you think customers will keep comparing that to Netflix and go, but come on, all the other things in music and movies I can get or I can eat? Do you think that is going to make a difference for them? So I don't know, maybe Marcos, do you want to comment and reply to your colleagues?
That's great. Well, first of all, I have to say that I love participating in these panels because I learn so much, and it's great to see you, Peter. It's been a long time since we've seen each other, and I'm always open to being convinced. I love the approach of Joerg. I'm a very open-minded dinosaur, so that's fine. I'm going to tell you all a personal story about how my approach to this. I'm watching Game of Thrones, and I'm renting the chapters from Apple. And then my kids come to the room and say, "Daddy, you can get it on Netflix for free. Why are you paying the rent?" And I say, because that's what I believe. That we live in this house, and that you go to that school because we live in a content economy. If we don't value the content, this is the lesson for me. So when I think of the in between, I much rather prefer a model that I can put a price, even if it's a very discounted price. We grew 60% our ebook sales last year, just because we decided to join the promotion program that Amazon has in Brazil, the KDD. So every week you have one book that you're going to make a very aggressive promotion. But I can see the number of downloads under that specific price. So the normal price is $14.99. This week I'm selling it at $4.99, and I multiply it by 10, and then the following week, and that's the promise, the book will continue to sell at the $14.99 price. I like that. I never found an algorithm. I don't have an MIT engineer here in the office to look at every time we tried the all-you-can-eat model, my question is how do you compensate? So how do you put a value to every book that's in the catalog? And it was never clear to me. I'm hoping to find someone who gives me a very simple explanation on how you split the pie. Yeah. And I love what Peter said, because we have to think about the authors. At the end of the day, we represent authors. It's our mission. It's the reason we exist, to protect copyright, to promote books, to compensate authors. So we have to find models that are easy to explain. I hate when I get $1,000 and I ask, what are those $1,000, where do they come from? How many downloads, at what value, what price? So I think we need a clear way of establishing that. If we do, I'm very open to discuss and try new models.
So more transparency, right?
If I'll try to answer you, Marcus, because I think that's a really important point you make, and certainly one of the biggest challenges is that all of us in the book industry are still very much in the book selling mindset. We like to say this is how much paper we put in, this is the advance, and we calculate, and this is kind of what the value of a book is based on: genre, price, genre, amount of paper, amount of prestige, new, old, and we kind of cook up a price. That mindset we kind of have to let go for an entirely different mindset that's purely based on consumption volume. And that's a big step. Look, we move to we pay basically on a consumed minute base. So every minute has a value every month. That value of the minute is based on the amount of subscribers' monies we collect, the fees. So that it's a dynamic value that's based on how much users we have, and then allocated to the number of minutes this particular title has been consumed. So that's a very different mindset, and that's very hard for publishers. It's also hard for me. I notice you still, if a book has 6 million minutes in a particular month, you're like, okay, 6 million minutes. We still gravitate back to that one particular unit, and the unit of units is a copy. I get that, and that's very hard, and we need to try to put as much as possible visualize data around it to kind of convey what that actually means in terms of value. But the rest of the world outside the book industry has moved on. They're not thinking anymore in selling a unit, or I mean, part of that consumer cohort. There's still people that you can manipulate or steer or encourage, if you like, by a price promotion and say, normally you pay $15, now you pay $3. There's still a market for that. Like Joerg said, we don't have to stop doing that by all means. Let's not change what's working. But the other side actually doesn't get incentivized by that. They see a value, or you have to buy something, and they turn around. So for those readers that actually are sensitive to just being encouraged to read, I think the consumption approach takes out that whole threshold of having to buy something, having to commit something, and that's, I think, where we have to develop a new mindset. That's also why I think the credit model is absolutely doomed. The whole, we also have a credit model for audio in North America and in the US. But it's because the publishers keep the price so high. The only reason why any restriction on a subscription, whether it's kind of beginning to throttle the consumption or put a limit in, is always driven by you can't make the model work. So either the publishers ask too much, or the retailer wants too much, but someone wants too much. And the credit model, you're still forced to do something. There's a limit to your consumption. And I think that's from the consumer's point of view, never a good experience. So I believe that's doomed. But it also points to someone made a comment about, or a question about Penguin Random House. And it's not just Penguin Random House, but you can see how some of the largest publisher conglomerates in the world have been gaining critical mass and are very blatantly building critical mass around the world for some very good strategic reasons, I'm sure, that are not so hard to come up with. But you have this consolidation in the whole entertainment industry, where the publishing industry always stood a little bit outside, and some of the biggest players are beginning to put in counterbalance. In my view, it's absolutely clear that those big platforms are gearing up to start their own verticalized consumption. And in that respect, the case right now in North America about anti-competition is fascinating because it's really, I think, going to shape some of the future. We don't know the outcome, but let's assume those big conglomerates are continuing to consolidate and verticalize. That leaves the rest of us in a very interesting situation to decide what are we going to do. And to link that back to our service, what we see is that even if the biggest conglomerates don't put in their content, it doesn't actually affect consumers. That's the interesting thing. And I think that's a discussion that in Reboot 1 came up. There is a new publishing industry developing outside trade publishing. We're all very worried about trade publishing, and because that's what we've known since centuries. But there is a whole industry that's focusing on serialized content specifically for digital, specifically for subscriptions. We see that we have a self-publishing platform, and self-publishing, all of us still think like, well, it's kind of vanity and it isn't that. It's a highly professional, lucrative, fantastic business. We have 75,000 indie publishers that create a lot of revenue. In some of our markets in Canada, it's about half of the consumed minutes in Kobo Plus is a indie published book. No Hachette, no Penguin and Mouse, none of those fantastic big publishing conglomerates. And it points to, even if we as the book industry, the traditional book industry, don't like what's happening in the world really will move on. And I think the opportunities for parties outside that trade industry are phenomenal. And again, as an old publisher, that makes me really exciting, because it means that local niche publishers, local specific publishers that try to do something else, they're going to be so successful, and they're going to have an entirely different connection to their audiences that I think we can't really foresee yet how it happens. But for me, having seen how indie publishing has grown and has become very, very good, if I'm a 12-year-old James Joyce, my big masterwork when I'm 18 or 20 will maybe not go to Penguin and Mouse next time. Maybe I'll figure out myself how to reach to my authors. And I think that's where the focus should be in terms of author management. How do we manage those creative minds and the masterpieces they will create? How do we deliver those to the biggest possible global audiences? And just on a very basic and I guess very high level point of view, I think that's where the trade industry will have to adjust, because we're going into a very different era of communicating to and connecting to our audiences.
Thank you, Peter. We have some comments here that I think you guys touched on already, but Mauro Tosca from Gems in Italy is specifically asking, comparing what you just said, Peter, the credit model and the all-you-can-eat model. Marcus, I think that you are pretty much okay with the credit model, right? That's something that's okay. So that's one of the comments. And then Ricardo Costa from Brazil is also commenting that at the end of the day, it depends on if you can have more people reading to compensate what you're losing in terms of revenue. So the anti-cannibalization thing. I can tell you that here in Sweden, the Eric Wiberg, who is the guy who makes all the reports about the industry, if you're asking about cannibalization, he says it's too early to say. He says, we don't know yet, it's too early. So if you look at the cold numbers, feels like there's no cannibalization because the print market's going down and the digital market's going up in a way to compensate that. But if you ask the experts, they are reluctant to actually accept that yet. They say you need to wait and see. And the publisher's position in Sweden is pretty much, let's try out the models, but let's be careful. Let's not be naive about that. Our time is finishing, but there is one thing I think it's interesting to comment. When we start to protect the content so much, one of the risks is that you start having lots of exclusivity deals. And for me, this is really very dangerous, and it's killing the market. So I don't think there is anyone from Poland here today, but I've been studying the Polish audiobook market. They have around 15,000 titles, from which half is under exclusivity deals with with specific platforms. In Norway, the two largest publishers own the two largest platforms, and they keep their content only in their own platforms. And then now authors are going nuts and threatening to sue the publishers because they want to see their books everywhere. So what is your feeling about this exclusivity? Because if you compare to movies, then you need Netflix, you need Disney, you need Hulu, you need everything. So at the end of the day, I think that's a real issue, that you need to avoid that and really have all the content available everywhere for everyone in the right place, in the right price, of course, and respecting the chain. But any comments on that? Maybe you, Joerg?
Yeah, I share Marco's dinosaur feelings. I think lots of us are dinosaurs, actually, because we work in an industry which has been around for a long time, pretty much since copyright laws were passed 200 years ago. And so I see our job as being representatives of our author's interests. And exclusivity is never in anyone's interest except the one who's asking for exclusivity. So that, for me, is a clear no-go. And I actually wanted to ask or answer Marco's questions because I'm not a rocket scientist either, but I don't think it takes MIT engineers to figure out what the impact of cannibalization is. And again, if there's one thing I learned about the development of the digital markets in the last 20 years, I had so many strategy meetings and workshops and digital workshops, and there was one common thread: we were always wrong about predicting the future. The market always developed differently. So my key learning is try it out, test things. And again, it's not all or nothing. There will be some authors who will be interested in seeing what the brave new world will bring. Others will say, no way, only over my dead body. You've got to accept that. Start with those who are interested, and you just compare revenue previously and revenue in the new world, where yes, there will be some degree of cannibalization, but there will be increased traffic, there will be new subscribers, there will be additional revenue, and you look at it, and if it's a compelling picture, others will follow, and if not, well, you stop it and you've learned your lesson. I mean, there's one thing in our industry which we're really good at, which is making mistakes and trying to learn from them, right? We make mistakes every single day. We buy books which don't fulfill our expectations. So let's take that to our sales approach and test things out on a small scale. If it works, make it big. If not, move on. That's what I would really suggest to everyone.
Thank you, Joerg. Marcos, we're running out of time, but your last comments. Were you convinced?
There's a joke.
You didn't convince anyone you are a dinosaur. I can guarantee that.
I really enjoy it. I like, you probably know the joke, in God we trust, everybody else brings data. So I really like this approach of testing things and the tryout. The MIT engineer is just to check the spreadsheets. It's not the cannibalization. Is it's a changing environment. In this, I started talking about the ecosystem, and we tend to forget at the end the customer, the reader, he's a key part of the ecosystem. So this is really the question of what the consumer wants. In the end, you spoke about the changes happening in Sweden. I live in Brazil, so it's a very different environment, country. So much to grow in terms of education and bringing people to the reading, to become readers. The number of readers in Brazil is so small compared to the size of the country. So it's, yes, if we can have new models to bring new readers to the market, this will eventually help us grow as a whole. But I'm very concerned, and I'm very, the value of books and the value of reading, we have been losing that. And I think as an industry, we have to protect that. So that's my major concern. But it was so nice to meet everyone here today. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Marcos. Obrigado. Peter, your goodbye.
Yeah, thank you for including me in this. I agree with Marcos as usually. It's important we do this together. I was reading Simon's comment. There's always, like, the publishing industry is always a little worried about data and about all these complicated things. I'm not a rocket science either, but I have learned to work with data and to rely on data. And I think inside the industry, we really need to do it together. again, because if you step outside the industry, there's huge industries waiting to eat up the little sweet book industry and incorporate in their industries. That's, I think, the common enemy we share, and we can only do it together with authors, retailers, everything in between, and the authors to figure out how to find readerships. And it's platforms like this that I find very encouraging, because it means we exchange ideas.
Thank you, Peter. Joerg, your last words. You have 30 seconds.
Hey, be brave and be smart.
Danke. Thank you. Dank u wel. Rutger, back to you.